Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. With the first quarter of the year being over, I decided to do something different on my channel this year. I want to do quarterly updates during which I will pick out some of my favorite reads of the quarter and see if that matches up towards the end of this year, or if maybe after sitting with some books for a while, if the underdogs of the year will end up coming in at the top of the year. This is mostly just for me to, I guess, understand my reading taste and how much of an effect books can have on me months after reading them. But I decided to make it into content because I thought it would be fun for you guys to go on this journey with me. So I have my spreadsheet in front of me and I do have stats because Deja's the best and she created the spreadsheet and she put stats in here. So far as of today, I have read 55 books. My Goodreads goal of the year is actually 75, and so as of April, I only have 20 more books to read for me to hit my goal for the year. The average amount of books I've read each month this year has been 4.58. The total amount of pages I've read this year is 23,955. One of them was a reread and 4 of them were DNFs. In January, I read 22 books. In February, I read 27 books. And in March, I only read 7 books. I've mentioned this before on my channel that March was a crazy busy month, but having 22 and then 26 and then 7, that's how you know that March just got away from me. Of all the books that I've read, 3 of them were classics, 7 of them were contemporaries, 15 of them were fantasy, 5 were historical, 1 was a horror, 1 was magical realism, another one was mystery. I've read 12 non-fictions, 6 romance, 4 sci-fis. So right now, fantasy and non-fiction I have read a good amount of. I can't say that I won't be reading any more fantasy for the rest of the year because I am a fantasy reader, but in terms of me reading more non-fictions this year, I mean, already having 12 non-fictions read from the first 3 months of the year is a lot. So maybe I can give myself a break on the non-fictions, but I'm probably lying to you because I'm in my non-fiction bag and I am having a lot of fun. In terms of how I read the books, 19 of the books I read were physical and 36 of the books I read was audio. I'm already like consuming more books via audio than I have in like the last 2 years. And I'm really proud of that because in my end of the year content last year, I stated that I wanted to incorporate more audiobooks in my reading to free up space for me to do other things and not just be stuck like sitting and reading a physical copy. But between grad school and the new job that I just started, I'm becoming more dependent upon audiobooks. So I've definitely consumed more than I thought I did, but I'm glad about it because it means that I am doing what I set out to do and also able to do more things while listening to an audiobook. I can get some other stuff done. 24 of the books I read were by authors of color. I mean, 24 out of 55, I'm doing pretty good. 4 of them were indie published and then 51 of them were traditionally published. And then for my star ratings, I've had 2 books that I gave 1 star, 5 books that I gave 2 stars. I have 10 books that I gave 3 stars, 6 books that I gave 3.5 stars, 10 books that I gave 4 stars, and 17 books that I gave 5 stars for an average rating of 3.77. 55 books and an average rating of 3.7. I don't even know if that's good or bad. I have no clue. You tell me. You comment below and tell me if that's good or bad. And then lastly, 43 of the books I read were adult, 7 of them were YA, and 5 of them were middle grade. And I'm also really proud of that because another thing that I said I wanted to do this year was read more middle grade. So I am tackling my yearly to-do list. So with that being out of the way, I have 6 books in front of me that just come to mind when I think about my favorites of the first quarter. And yeah, we're just gonna dive into those. So first I have How Moon Fuertes Fell in Love with the Universe. I like every time I think about this book, I remember it more fondly than I did before. So in this book, we're following this character by the name of Moon, and Moon has a twin sister whose name is Star, and Star is extremely popular and beloved, and she is kind of like a social media superstar. And so the family dynamics kind of revolve around Star. Their mother is Star's manager, and then Moon has to pick up the slack and be her photographer, or really do anything that is required to make Star more popular. And in this book, there is this tour that a lot of social media influencers are going on, and Moon's mother basically says that Star isn't going to go without Moon, and so Moon has no choice but to go. And Moon has this image of herself that is just not very reflective. She doesn't have a lot of self-confidence, and she is just resigned to live in the shadow of her twin sister Star. And on this tour, she comes in contact with a guy named Santiago, and Santiago is also the sibling of an extremely popular person, and he is dealing with his own type of insecurities and self-doubt, and they find this connection between one another. However, they are both dealing with very, very heavy things, and it interferes in their relationship a lot. And so you get to see them on their journey of trying to figure out if they're going to be together, as well as building their own self-confidence and just overcoming those insecurities outside of each other. And so with Moon being our main character, just the connection that I felt with her when I was reading this book, and just seeing her deal with so much like jealousy and how much pushback she got when she started to love herself and put herself first, and then her navigating through so much trauma and emotional and sometimes even physical abuse. But this is definitely not one of those books where the main character just has this self-doubt and like unself-fulfilling image in their head that doesn't really reflect their reality. Moon's perception of herself is a direct correlation from how people in her life see her and how they treat her, and that just makes Moon's journey of coming to love herself that much more impactful, because she has to do it despite all of the people in her life who are supposed to be supporting her that is not doing it. I'm very glad that I decided to read this book. It was an anticipated 5-star read, and I did end up giving it 5 stars. And I have had this book on a priority for me to read for like a year. And when this book was supposed to be read, I think I was getting behind schedule on like my monthly TBRs, and so I almost did not read this book again. But something about it was just like, no, you need to read this book, and I'm very, very glad that I did. The next book is probably not a surprise to anyone, and that is going to be The Women of Chateau, Lafayette. This probably is still one of my favorite historical fictions, definitely my favorite historical fiction of the year so far. We are following multiple women in this book in 3 different timelines. One character we're following is during the American and French Revolution, and the second character that we're following is during World War I, and then the last character we're following is World War II. And all 3 women that we're following in this book have a connection with Chateau Lafayette, and you just follow the 3 different dynamics of the 3 wars that was occurring during their time and how they navigated the system. And the women in this book are written so exceptionally well. Like, every woman in this story is dynamite and so robust, and I just connected with them each in my very own way. There was a perfect amount of like historical context, historical accuracy, and then just messy things that was occurring in their life. And just like each woman in this story is so relatable. 2 of them are wives that have to navigate, you know what I'm saying, their husband being in the spotlight and what it means to be a devout and loyal wife, and how other people perceive you, what motherhood is about, choosing between if you are going to pursue your aspirations and do what you know in your heart you need to do, but then also being pulled back by your children, and like what it means for a man to go off and do whatever it is he wants to do, but the expectations around a woman doing that is just not the same. And I really enjoyed this book. This is the perfect historical fiction to jump into. You don't need to know any historical context around any of the 3 wars that are occurring in this story. So if you enjoy following stories that include such profound women, this is one that I would definitely recommend. I did tab this book up quite a bit, and I read it as a buddy read, and that just heightened my experience so much more because we both really, really enjoyed this book. And if you guys could have heard some of our voice messages, like when the women in this book were upset, we were upset. When the women in this book were being mansplained stuff and like their men was just acting out of line. It was just like, ooh, like, and there's more than one scene in this book where a wife has to come in contact with a mistress, and like just the way they handle it and how like poised they are, it's like, it just gives you a new level of respect of women that were navigating the time period that they lived in. And it challenges the perception that we have of women that were seen as devout and by their husband's side, very Christian, very pious. If those perceptions that we have of women today was actually even really true. The next two, I'm sure, are also no surprise, and that is going to be The Binding and The Betrayals. Me and Bridget Collins, we had a fantastic time. These were 2 5-star predictions, and I did not give this one 5 stars. I ended up giving it a 4, like 4.5 out of 5, but this one slapped. This was a 6 out of 5. But in hindsight, I ended up enjoying this one more as it sat with me. And that's not unusual for me. Some books just don't have the immediate impact, especially because my expectations for this one was rather high going into it. And it was both books were extremely different, like extremely different from what I expected. And so like I can appreciate this book for what it was. And then why I did not give it 5 stars is because it did not have like a very atmospheric feeling to it. The story that we were told existed within a very tight bubble, and I just wanted more expansion on that. But in The Betrayals, I did not have that problem, so this one got the full 5 out of 5 stars. Bridget Collins, like with the 2 books that I read, I could easily call her one of my favorite authors. She has like hands down the best prose I have ever seen, and I have read a lot of books, and you guys know I love prose and I love whimsical writing, but there's just something like dark about her whimsical writing. Like, it's whimsical, but it's gothic and like haunting at the same time. There's something sinister about her fantastical writing, especially in The Binding. So if you are into something like that and it sounds interesting, I highly recommend you pick it up. Let me tell you what these books are about, because I feel like I'm just raving about them. In The Binding, we're following this character by the name of Emmett, and Emmett is called upon one day to come be the apprentice for a binder, and it is not the most accepted profession in this world. In fact, they are actually looked down upon and ostracized from the community. Emmett doesn't know why he's being called by this binder, and he just knows that books are bad. Everyone hates books, but he doesn't really understand why. And so the book binder doesn't really give him much information, but as he gets more into the world of binding books, he starts to realize that there's more to these books than just paper. They actually bind memories and like real life experiences of a person. Now, what's particular about Emmett is that he experiences kind of like fever and fainting spells where he blacks out. And then one day he comes across a book that has his own name on it. And so he becomes aware that one of his own memories has been bounded, and he is somehow connected to a much larger story. He just does not know exactly what it is. Now, The Betrayals is so much more fun. It was definitely my more favorite, and there is a twist in this book that I will admit I did not see coming, especially because I read it after The Binding, and I just thought that I knew the author after this book, and I got to know her so well. So I was pretty like sure that she was going to take certain liberties with this story, and she blew my mind, and I loved her so much more for that. So we're following a character named Leo in this book, and he used to go to this academy, and he decided that he wanted to leave the academy after something very traumatic happened there, and he went into the world of politics. So we're in this kind of like fake European country, but you get the feel that it's like the early 1920s, 1930s in Europe, and this kind of like fake country that we're in is having a rise in like fascism. And in the world of politics that Leo lives in, he pisses off the wrong person, and so he's essentially exiled from his party, and he decides to go back to the academy. When he returns to the academy, there is a female teacher there, which is very different because the school has been historically all male, and so he's very surprised that they have let a woman into the school and given her a position of power. And he also feels this strange connection to her. He's pretty sure he remembers her, but they have never actually met before. She certainly has never met him, as there is so many elements happening where the outside world is becoming more fascist every day. They're targeting people of different religions. They're targeting people of different races. And the academy wants to remain outside of all of that. So there's essentially 2 timelines in this book. You're following Leo in the past as he has these very homoerotic connections with one of his classmates. They're like frenemies, and they have this strange attraction to one another. And then you also follow Galileo in the present timeline where he's interacting with this female teacher and trying to figure out what is so mysterious about her. I cannot wait for her to put out another book, because when I tell you it's an automatic buy, I'm gonna have it on pre-orders. Her covers are beautiful, her writing is beautiful, her plots are out of this world, and her character work is some of the best that I've seen. So yeah, like, she's a favorite. And then the last two books I have is New Age of Empire and An Indigenous People's History of the United States. These are, of the 12 nonfictions I've read, definitely the top two, and one follows like the residential effects of racism and colonialism and the new age, and how we're still kind of in a neo-colonial world, like the new modern age of like neo-colonialism. And then this follows clearly an Indigenous people's history in the US, and it starts like literally from the beginning, which I really did enjoy, and it explores so many dark and just heartbreaking aspects of Indigenous history in America. And I think that it gives a very clear understanding as to like the current state of events and just how much trauma and like generational things that Indigenous youth have to overcome to find success in the US, and how challenging that can be. And like, if you just want your mind to be opened up, you want to be more aware of things that are happening in the world, definitely check out New Age of Empire. But I do think that Indigenous voices need to be amplified. They need to have their stories heard more, and we need to give them as much momentum as we can, because they deserve it. It is a long time coming, and I hope to see a future in which Indigenous communities all around the world thrive, despite all of the things that they have been subjected to. I do want to note that the author of The New Age of Empire is actually, I don't know if he's from the UK or if he was raised in the UK. So one of the things that I thought was most interesting about this book is understanding the effects of colonialism and slavery in America, and how it benefited and enriched so many economies outside of America, especially in Britain, because of the connections that Britain has with actually stealing slaves from Africa and forcing them into the US. And so you have this kind of disconnect in our history after the Revolution, where slavery in America becomes entirely the fault of Americans. However, the author paints such a clear picture of how Britain was still very much in the background, still very much navigating all of the profits and bearing fruit to a lot of the slave labor that was occurring in the US. And he talks about so many things in Britain that has a deep history, and how they were able to gain such wealth from the cheap imports that they were getting from the southern states in the US. And then also what they did with the profits of that money in the UK. That was very eye-opening for me, because usually when I read books that talk about things like this, it is by African-American authors or authors from like the Caribbean. And so to get this POV from a Black person in the UK was nearly priceless. Like, I got so much perspective on things and was able to like just clear up such a fuzzy picture. So I now, going forward, if I see another book that talks about colonialism and racism and slavery and all those things that I have been reading about technically my whole life, from the perspective of someone in Europe, particularly in the UK, I definitely will be picking that up. And so that wraps up the first quarter favorites. We have The Women of Chateau, Lafayette, The New Age of Empire, The Betrayals, The Binding, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, and How Moon Fuertes Fell in Love with the Universe. I will see you guys next quarter, and then I can't wait to see you back here at the end of the year to see which is going to make my top of the year favorites for 2022. Thanks for watching to the end of this video, and I will see you guys next time.